I kind of titled the whole lesson, "You Can Learn a Lot from a Dummy." Saul he's got trouble. Okay, so I don't know about you, but I had to pull out my maps because these people were these 3 chapters were all over the place, and I'm like, so anyway, I went down a rabbit hole, and I did some digging on the Philistines, and anyway, so I thought I'd share that with you because that's just kind of how I do. But anyway, so the Philistines originally, they think migrated from the Aegean area with some 5 other European nations, and I don't know what was going on in Europe at the time, but they were coming down, and they decided they wanted to invade Egypt. Well, Ramesses III said, and there was a big battle, naval and land. So that pushed the Philistines over towards Israel and Syria and up almost through the Fertile Crescent, but mainly on the coast of the Mediterranean Sea at Israel. So anyway, they invaded Canaan and destroyed the Hittite Empire. They kind of messed up the ethnic culture, or intermarrying, and so what was I trying to say? Oh, and the Hebrews were aware of this because they kind of knew the story of all this. And there were 5 city-states ruled by 5 lords. And if you remember back in the other chapters when the Philistines had taken the Philistines. I keep going back and forth on that. But they had taken the Ark of the Covenant, and they went to each of their city-states, and something happened at each one, and that's when they, okay, so they were in kind of a confederation. They were wealthy, they were advanced in technology, they were already in the Iron Age when they invaded Canaan, and they had a monopoly on, making iron swords, agricultural tools, whatever, and people would come and pay. It wasn't just the Hebrews, because we'll learn that coming up, that had to buy all their tools from the Philistines, but it was other nations in the area too. The Philistines were influenced by the Semitic language, the names, the gods like Dagon, Ashtoreth, and Beelzebub. I guess is where Beelzebub comes from. Anyway, and if you remember Semites, they were descended from Noah's son Shem, and they eventually were invaded by the Canaanite tribes that were there. So the Philistines, which is really, now we call them the Palestine, I was thinking, we're still trying to run people out of the land of Canaan. I mean, it was not just here, it's now. But what I did find that was very interesting, because I always thought the Philistines were part of the nations that were that the Hebrews had to defeat to get into Canaan, but they weren't. The other nations that were spoken of in Deuteronomy by Moses were the Hittites, the Girgashites, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. It wasn't Philistines. So I thought that was kind of interesting. So here they've kind of, with Joshua for 6 years, they kind of made their way and established, each tribe was an assigned area of Canaan. Well, the Philistines kind of kept their part of the coast of Israel. And Dan, the tribe Dan, had a real problem with them because they were assigned right off on the coast, but they were more pressed and pushed back by the Philistines. And so that's when I think they went up to the northern part and kind of made their own little area and named the city after their dad. So anyway, I just thought that was interesting. So, because I thought they'd gone in and were still fighting the Philistines, but that's not it. So the Philistines are really trying to take over everything. They're pushing up this way, and they're coming around this way. Or this way, I always forget. But so this is basically the tribe of Benjamin, because there's Shiloh. Remember, that's where they had set the temple up, and that's where Eli was, and but Samuel lives in Ramah, and he's the judge, priest, prophet, and he makes his rounds right there. So anyway, all the people are kind of in this area, so the Philistines are coming around and kind of choking them out. So that's kind of where we are with the Philistines and where we're opening here. So, all right. Make sure I didn't leave anything out on that one. Okay, so we're opening up. At some point, up until now, the Philistines have kind of been under a little bit of control. They're not really doing anything active, so the Israelites, even though they're still scared, are kind of regrouping. And so here is where Saul, he's begun his reign, and this is chapter 13, that first paragraph, 1 through 4. But so we see Saul here kind of gathering an army. And right now he's got 3,000, and 1/3 of that he's given to his son Jonathan. Okay? And this is the first time Jonathan's kind of mentioned in the book of Samuel. So I'll go ahead and do this. What did y'all, because I know it's coming up, the question, what did y'all learn about Jonathan?
He was fearless. Mm-hmm. He trusted God.
I was thinking, to me, he was like special ops, like Navy SEAL. And because he had guerrilla tactics and used a small group, because he was, later on he says, well, if God's in our favor, we can do this with a few, or we can do this with a full army, but it won't matter to God. So that's kind of how he had his belief was. I said he was pretty good at strategizing. My mother-in-law says strategery. I don't even know if that's a word, but anyway, but I could see that with his planning skills and how he was going to attack. He had already won, I guess, some kudos because he hit one of the garrisons of the Philistines and killed their governor there in Jeba. And the Philistines heard of that. But what did Saul do when he got wind of what his son did? He took the credit. And how did he do that? What did he do? He blew the trumpet.
Oh, that's right.
And who's supposed to blow the trumpet? The priests.
Yeah.
So.
He also offered sacrifice. He wasn't supposed to do that either.
Yeah. Yeah. He. It seems like Jonathan's a rule follower, and which is a good thing when it comes to the Lord. But Saul just seems in these chapters he gets worse and worse, but it's like he just picks and chooses the rules that he's going to keep. Yes, he is. He is, I don't know. In the lesson it sounds, she made it, I can't remember one of the questions, but sometimes Saul does the right thing. But his heart's not there, and it's just a rule to be followed, not because he loves the Lord, and not because he wants to honor the Lord and obey him and listen to his voice. It's really all about Saul. So, maybe he had some good attributes, but I really don't think, that in the end, even in the beginning, that he was who Israel needed to have. So, he didn't get it. So, Jonathan, I guess if you want to do a compare and contrast with his father. So, Jonathan is really a good military guy. He follows the Lord. I mean, he seeks the Lord's will as best he can. He's very loyal, because you'll see that later on with David, and he's loyal to God. Whereas Saul, as long as everything's going his way and going well, hey, I did this. This is great. Look at me. And as soon as things do not go well, he's like, well, they made me do it, or he hides, or, and he's just not a man to be respected when he's supposed to be the leader of a nation. And he's not very good at keeping morale up with his people. So anyway, she had asked in the lesson, when after he tooted his own horn, hey, good morning.
Good morning.
How are you? Come on in.
Well, thanks.
But after Israel heard the news that really it was Jonathan who smote the garrison, but Saul, they were praising Saul, the people were then summoned to Gilgal, which is right on the River Jordan. Okay? Well, that's significant, I think, because she asked to deal with that, because I think before Samuel had summoned the people before Saul became anointed at Mizpah. And that was on Samuel's route, because like I said, Samuel did this route. He would just make the rounds and stop at home for a while and make the rounds. And but Gilgal, as Saul put it, if we go back to 1 Samuel 11, 14 through 15. Right. He was made king there, and he, what did I say? 14 through 15. Sorry, I got the wrong one. So Samuel said to the people, "Come and let us go to Gilgal and renew the kingdom there." So all the people went to Gilgal, and there they made Saul king before the Lord in Gilgal. There they also offered sacrifices of peace offerings before the Lord, and there Saul and all the men of Israel rejoiced greatly. So now Gilgal is kind of, I guess, the new meeting place for everybody to gather. Okay, so now we have the Philistines. The Philistines show up with 30,000 chariots, 6,000 horsemen, and people like the sand, which is on the seashore in abundance, and they came up and camped in Michmash, east of Beth Haven. So now we've got all the Israelites in Gilgal, and Michmash is somewhere in this area near Ramah. So they're closing in on the Israelites. When the men of Israel saw that they were in a strait, for the people were hard pressed, then the people hid themselves in caves and thickets and cliffs and in cellars and in pits. And also some of the Hebrews crossed the Jordan into the land of Gad and Gilead. But as for Saul, he was still in Gilgal, and all the people followed him, trembling. So we got this army, huge. Israel's scared to death, and they're looking for morale, for leadership, and Saul's just hiding. Yeah. Okay, so I love this part. So Saul waited 7 days, according to the appointed time set by Samuel, but Samuel did not come to Gilgal. And I think he was on his rounds. He was coming from Ramah, which was the last stop before he got to Gilgal. And maybe he was running a little behind, but he was coming. But he did not come, and the people were scattering from Saul. So Saul said, "Bring to me the burnt offering and the peace offerings," and he offered the burnt offering. And, I underline bring to me, not bring to God. So it's really a me. He makes himself holy and consecrated enough to be able to do something the priest is supposed to do. Or actually, Samuel specifically said, "I'll come and do it." And it came about, as soon as he finished offering the burnt offering, that behold, Samuel came. And Saul went out to meet him and to greet him. But Samuel said, "What have you done?" And if you remember what Nancy had said, Saul is kind of under Samuel's guidance, and Samuel definitely is under God's guidance. So it's God, Samuel, Saul, as far as, leader or who's going to lead the people. Well, so if you think Samuel's under God, it's funny that if you remember, most of the time when somebody's messed up and sinned against God in the Bible and God personally shows up, what is the first thing he does? He doesn't point the finger and go, you did that. He goes, what did you do? So Samuel is giving Saul an opportunity. What have you done? And Saul says, because I saw the people were scattering from me, and that you did not come within the appointed days, and that the Philistines were assembling at Michmash. Therefore I said, now the Philistines will come down against me at Gilgal, and I have not asked the favor of the Lord. So I forced myself and offered the burnt offering. So I looked up forced, because when you think of forced, you think of something making you, pushing you towards, making you do something that you're, not, that you're against. So I looked it up, and it's only used one time, and it's different, so it's to abstain or restrain. So I was going, okay. So basically, I went ahead and I looked it up in the Message, and it said, I felt compelled to do it. I felt like I needed to do it. I'm sorry?
NIV says
compelled? Okay. But but he says, I forced myself. I could just say I forced myself. I didn't really want to do it, but I forced myself. I felt compelled. Right. Exactly. So he's messed up again. So he tooted the horn he wasn't supposed to toot, and that a priest was supposed to do. And now he's gone and done a burnt offering, which in Leviticus, all the rules about the sprinkling of the blood and drink. Yeah, and he just messed up. Samuel said to Saul, you have acted foolishly. You have not kept the commandment of the Lord your God, which he commanded you, for now the Lord would have established your kingdom over Israel forever. But now your kingdom shall not endure. The Lord has sought out for himself a man after his own heart, and the Lord has appointed him as ruler over his people, because you have not kept what the Lord commanded you. So his punishment is no dynasty. It won't matter. His line will not be leaders in the Hebrew world. So, and I was thinking of Samuel, that he's got to be fed up with all the people and Saul. And I just, Mom gave me this artwork that I have that has a saying on it, and it's my favorite one. It says, my mother always said, finish the things you start. But she didn't know about the people I'd have to work with. And so, anyway, I feel like that's how Samuel is right now. He is just, you've acted foolishly. What are you doing? You're doing the priest's job. So, and Saul's blaming everybody else.
Amy, did it bother anybody else that Jonathan, you said God first, and then Samuel, and then Saul, and then it would be Jonathan under Saul. Mm-hmm. But he acted independently.
I thought about that too, because I thought, well, maybe he's rash.
And he didn't, and he didn't pray to God. He just stated that God could do anything,
right,
regardless of what they were up against.
But then there's that trust too, and maybe, yeah. But well, he's seems to be more experienced a little bit than his father. But I will say this, that, yeah, he did. And you got to remember that Saul had already started gathering this army of 3,000 men. So, and he sent out Jonathan with 1,000. And so Jonathan I mean, it must have been an order or a plan to, Samuel still wants everybody to be the Philistines, and God wants the Philistines to be pushed back. This land is supposed to be for his people. So, I don't know, but I'm guessing that he had an order to go and as best he can to push back the Philistines to keep them from coming to Gilgal. And I'm guessing he did do that. So he was loyal to his father, even though we don't have that, but I'm assuming just because the army's gathering. Okay? All right. Oh, I know what the message said about Saul saying about forced. I had to take things into my own hands. That's what it was. All right, so the Philistines are starting a retaliation because Jonathan's attacked their garrison. The people are scared because the Philistines are showing up with a bunch of horses, chariots, weapons. And remember, the Philistines were in charge of all the metallurgy. So they were making the weapons that the Hebrews had to buy. And Saul and Jonathan are the only ones who have swords, which I'm not sure how they got them, because the Philistines really made it a point not to give the Hebrews any weapons, except for anything for agriculture was fine. So I'm not really sure how they ended up with swords. But Jonathan did have an armor bearer with him. And I'm assuming armor is, but anyway, so the Philistines are one big army, but they also have three groups of raiders going out and trying to enclose the Hebrews at this time. And then 19 through 23 is what I just kind of explained about their monopoly on blacksmithing, because they didn't want anybody to, lest the Hebrews make swords or spears. So all Israel went down to the Philistines, each to sharpen his plowshare, his mattock, his axe, and his hoe. And the charge was 2/3 of a shekel for the plowshares, the mattocks, the forks, the axes, and things to fix the hoes. So it came about on the day of battle that neither sword nor spear was found in in the hands of any of the people who were with Saul, and who were with Saul and Jonathan, but they were found with Saul and his son Jonathan. So they have swords. They're the only ones. The rest of the people, no wonder they're scared. They don't. They may have a donkey. They may have an axe, but they have things that are really, be on foot and up close and fighting. You have to get up close to use some of those weapons. So.
And if you didn't even have any weapons, you had to bring it.
Oh yeah.
My notes said that, in the Bible said that they fought with, the Israelites fought with the bow and arrow.
Okay. So they did have some weapon.
Slingshot.
Well, duh, because David had a slingshot. So, right. And that's true, but nothing metal. Yeah, well, and that would make sense, because that way they could fight with the bow and arrows further back. They didn't have to get up close for hand-to-hand combat. So, I'm sorry, I live with 3 boys, so I know a lot of this military stuff. We watch NCIS, we watch, So, anyway, any questions on chapter 13 so far?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I haven't taken the time to look this up, but is there a hierarchy of offerings? There's a burnt offering, there's a peace offering. Could someone elaborate on that?
Unless somebody else wants to. Usually, there's 3 kinds of offerings. One of them is for unintentional sins. It's basically to cover your fanny in case you did something you didn't know was a sin. Because we're all sinners, right? Even our good intentions. All right? The second one is for intentional, like you outright disobeyed, you know it, you've confessed it, and now you're offering a sacrifice to cover yourself. And then I think the third one is more of the peace offering, just, joy to the Lord. We love you. We want to give this to you, that kind of thing. And I'm sure there's some others, but those are the three main ones, I believe. So there's unintentional sin, and flat out disobedient, and then celebration, just rejoicing in the Lord and giving Him.
And what was given, like the best calf, the best horse, or whatever, was there any designation?
Yeah, I can't remember all of it, but yes, usually a bull, a calf, or a bull or a ram were given as the unintentional or the intentional sin. Sometimes it was doves. But Passover was a whole different one, because it was a lamb. I mean, it was from sheep. So it was an unblemished male. It had to live in the family's house. You became friends with it, loved on it, and then you had to slaughter the thing for Passover, and that was to represent the remembering that the angel of death passed over their homes in Egypt when the plague of the firstborn, when the Egyptians' firstborns were slaughtered by the angel of death, and that was so the angel of death would pass over with the blood on the lintels of the doors from the lamb. So that's
Would that be under the peace offering then?
I would think that would be, it's a sin offering, because the plagues came through as a result of Egypt's sin, and so that they would know who God was with all the miracles. I mean, whatever He said, it happened, and it took about 7 of them before they got it. So, does that make sense? Okay, where am I? All right. So chapter 14 is really about Jonathan. So he's with his armor bearer, and he's scouting out the garrison of the Philistines, and he didn't tell his dad. And I'm not sure why he didn't tell his dad, but it's probably a good thing. Because usually he's loyal, correct? But I think...
Didn't want to get in trouble, maybe, because his dad hasn't taken the initiative.
Maybe, yeah. I'm not really sure, but he didn't tell his dad. So nobody knew where he was. So because since Saul didn't know, nobody really knew where he was. But so while he's out scouting around, Saul's, and I don't know if this is a remarkable thing or not, but he's staying on the outskirts of Gibeah, which is somewhere in here. So they have kind of moved from Gilgal now. And he's sitting under a pomegranate tree. And I'm not sure if there's a reason. The writer specifies that it's a pomegranate tree, but I'm just taking it as, you've got some shade, you've got some food. I mean, it's a vacation. I don't know. That's just how I kind of see it, because it doesn't sound like, okay, we're going to get ready to go into battle, So the people that were still with him were about 600 at this point. Remember, he started off with 3,000. 1,000 went with Jonathan, which I don't know where they went. They scattered. And then his scattered. So Saul's scattered, so down there's 600. And now there's Aiha, who is... Anyone?
His right-hand man.
He's the priest. He's he's the son of Ahitub, Ichabod's brother. Remember Ichabod? He was Phinehas's son, and the wife died I mean, Phineas's wife died after he died, after she went in labor. So there was Ichabod. All right, so Ahijah's probably one of those that's left over to be a priest from Eli's line. And I thought it was kind of interesting that he's sticking with Saul. It's almost like Saul decided, well, I messed up with Samuel, so this time I'm going to keep a priest near me. I mean, that's kind of how because all of a sudden this guy comes in the story, and he is wearing the ephod. And if you remember what the priest wore, it's that blue linen, and it has the little bells on the hemline, and it's connected with the onyx gold straps, and then from that the chain is the breastplate with the 12 tribes of Israel represented by different gemstones. Okay, so and only the high priest wears that, so Samuel's got his back covered just in case he messes up doing a priestly job again. So anyway, Jonathan's trying to figure out how he's going to best attack the Philistines, and he's saying, perhaps the Lord will work with us. He can do anything. He can just use you and I, or he can use an army, but his purposes will be done. But Jonathan said, but let us have a sign. Let's think of we want a sign from God that this is the right thing to do. So, it says, come and let us cross over the garrison of these uncircumcised. Perhaps the Lord will work for us, for the Lord is not restrained to save by many or by few. And I know Nancy, this is one of the things I feel like she wanted me to bring up. He mentioned uncircumcised. He didn't say the enemy, but he said uncircumcised. So he definitely knows the Mosaic law, definitely knows God's statutes, and he is, I'm guessing, passionate about their culture, their way of doing things, the Hebrews, because he made a point to say uncircumcised, that's really bad. And she gave us some scriptures, and I thought we might want to go through that. Genesis 17. And I don't know if it was a typo, but I couldn't figure out there was one other part, but I just, or maybe that was the next one, not Genesis 17. Do what?
It should have been 20 instead of 10.
Maybe that was it, but I couldn't figure, still didn't make sense to me, but maybe it makes sense to somebody else.
What was that in?
It's Genesis 17, 1 through 14. Now, when Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to Abram and said to him, I am God Almighty. Walk before me and be blameless. I will establish my covenant between me and you, and I will multiply you exceedingly. Abram fell on his face, and God talked with him, saying, As for me, behold, my covenant is with you, and you will be the father of a multitude of nations. No longer shall your name be called Abram, but your name will be Abraham. For I have made you the father of a multitude of nations. I will make you exceedingly fruitful and will make nations of you, and kings will come forth from you. I will establish my covenant between me and you and your descendants after you throughout the generations for an everlasting covenant, to be God to you and to your descendants after you. I will give to you and your descendants after you the land of your sojournings, all the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. God said further to Abraham, Now, as for you, you shall keep my covenant, you and your descendants after you throughout their generations. This is my covenant which you shall keep between me and you and your descendants after you. Every male among you shall be circumcised, and you shall be circumcised in the flesh of your foreskin, and it shall be the sign of the covenant between me and you. And every male among you who is 8 days old shall be circumcised throughout your generations. A servant who is born in the house, or who is bought with money from any foreigner who is not of your descendants. A servant who is born in your house or who is bought with your money shall surely be circumcised. Thus shall my covenant be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. Anyway, and those who aren't circumcised, basically 14 is you've broken my covenant if you are not circumcised. But I thought that was, my covenant will be in your flesh for an everlasting covenant. So they have an outward sign that they have this covenant with God, that they are marked differently than any other nation, to be different, to be his people, to be, a blessing to others. So, Exodus 12. And I'm just going to do 24 through 26. And this is the one, it had a star beside it, and I didn't have time to go and figure what Zipporah meant by this. But, let's see. So, Moses is leaving Jethro with his wife Zipporah and his son, and they're going to Egypt to follow on a mission for God. Okay? So they're on their way, and the Lord said to Moses, when you go back to Egypt, see that you perform before Pharaoh all the wonders which I have put in your power, but I will harden his heart so that he will not let the people go. Then you shall say to Pharaoh, thus says the Lord, Israel is my son, my firstborn. So I said to you, let my son go that he may serve me, but you have refused to let him go. Behold, I will kill your son, your firstborn. Now it came about at the lodging place on the way that the Lord met him, Moses, and sought to put him to death. Then Zipporah took a flint and cut off her son's foreskin and threw it at Moses' feet. And she said, you are indeed a bridegroom of blood to me. So he let him alone. And at that time she said, you are a bridegroom of blood because of the circumcision. So anytime God sends you on a mission, or you're doing something because the Lord sends you, and you're marked for that before you enter he wants you circumcised to be, he wouldn't let anybody in Canaan to his promised land until everybody was circumcised. And so I'm assuming Egypt's not the promised land, but it's still where God wants him, and it's his mission. And he hasn't apparently circumcised his child, which is the law, or from a covenant of Abraham. So anyway, what I didn't get was she had to take matters in her own hands, the wife, and then threw her son's foreskin, and really it wasn't his foot or feet that she threw it on. It, in the translation, it's his private area. So, and then she says, now you're indeed a bridegroom of blood to me. Well, I know blood is a covenant, part of a covenant. You usually shed blood or sacrifice something when there's a covenant, and marriage is a type of covenant. But a bridegroom of blood, like now he's her husband, or now that they're really truly, he's like a spiritual leader. I don't know. Did y'all? I didn't have time to look it up. I was going to look up Vernon McGee, but Okay, so anyway. Then there's Exodus 12. Let's go there. 43 through 45. The Lord said to Moses, this is the ordinance of the Passover. No foreigner is to eat of it, but every man's slave purchased with money after you have circumcised him may eat of it. A sojourner or a hired servant shall not eat of it. It is to be eaten in a single house. You are not to bring forth any of the flesh outside of the house, nor are you to break any bone of it. And all the congregation, wait a minute. Anyway, but if a stranger sojourns with you and celebrates the Passover to the Lord, let all his males be circumcised, and let him come near to celebrate it, and he shall be like a native of the land. But no uncircumcised person may eat of it. So, circumcision here is to participate in God's feast or law or his statutes, and everybody had to be covered by being circumcised, even if you weren't part of the Hebrew nation. If you're just traveling and you were in the person's house, you had to be circumcised. That would be interesting.
A lot of guys would probably go hungry.
Yeah, they'd be like, oh.
George, we need to see you.
Okay. All right. and I'll skip over this because in Leviticus 12, 1 through 3, the male child, basically it says the male child has to be circumcised on the 8th day after he's born, taken to the temple, and it be done. But this is where, in the New Testament, when they talk about circumcision in Paul's letters, it's a circumcision of your heart rather than of the flesh. Well, in the Old Testament, it's of the flesh. But what I was pleasantly surprised that the idea of the heart is not new to New Testament. So Deuteronomy 10, 12 through 22, and I'll just paraphrase. Love the Lord your God with all your heart and your mind. Obey his commands and circumcise your heart. So if circumcision is an outward way of saying I belong to God, but he's also asking for your heart. So, and that's what the New Testament is saying. There's no outward sign needed anymore. I want your heart. I want you to circumcise. I want you to be so different and marked for me. So I thought I liked it. That was in the Old Testament too. That it wasn't that he wasn't saying this was just a sign that I want your heart to, and I want you to love me because I love you. The New Testament God, the Old Testament God, sometimes you think, he's wrathful, he's vengeful, he's just utterly destroying everybody in his path. He's real strict with these laws. And then we have the New Testament. He sent Jesus because that's the part of him that loves us. He gave his son. And a lot of times people ignore the Old Testament. And I hate that because I have fallen in love with the Old Testament because I just don't think anybody would get the need for Jesus and what he did and how he can transform somebody's life unless you know the background of what God's history and his people went through. It's just amazing. And so here I like it that God in the Old Testament is saying, I want your love, I love you, I want your love. So he hasn't changed. And so the New Testament, he didn't all of a sudden start loving people. He started loving them right away. And that's just really neat. That's why I want to go to these churches that just kind of say, well, we're going to read from the Hebrew Bible today. And I'm going, it's your Bible too, But anyway, that's my in-laws' church. I'm sorry. I'm like, if y'all just study the Old Testament, you might. Anyway. Okay, so. Yeah, sorry. I'm a rule follower, and, anyway, but that can turn ugly sometimes. So, do what?
You don't have it all for you either. Get ugly life.
Oh, man.
Listen, when I think about prayer, we can go to Christ just because he's always there and think about what they had to do.
Yep. God made it so they knew when Jesus came that, he goes, I didn't come to abolish the law, I came to fulfill it. It's still there, but it's your heart that I want. And she had Joshua 5, 1 through 8. And again, to paraphrase, the Hebrews in Egypt were circumcised. But when they went into the wilderness, they were moving around so much, they didn't circumcise the new generations. So Joshua and I guess the leaders, before they were to enter the promised land, had a mass circumcision. Because again, when you're going on a mission for God and God's leading you to hit wherever he wants you for his holy purpose and to glorify him, and he wants you to be set apart for him and holy yourselves, then he demands some kind of or he demands obedience. Anyway, so I'm going back to Jonathan, and I just think that when he says the uncircumcised Philistines, he is really insulting them because I think, he realizes what circumcision means to God, to the people, to him. And so he makes, obviously, a point that these Philistines aren't worth anything because they're not circumcised. So he comes up with this plan. He goes, we're going to cross over to the Philistines, and reveal ourselves to them. If they say, wait till we come to you, then we'll stand in our place and not go to them. But if they say, come up to us, then we're going to go up there, for the Lord has given them into our hands, and this shall be a sign for us. And when they both revealed themselves to the garrison of the Philistines said, hey, the Hebrews are coming out of their holes, out of the caves they've been hiding. Come on up. So Jonathan said, all right, this is what the Lord wants. So I think what they're coming at him. It's like Jonathan is ramming them, running and ramming them, throwing them over his shoulder, and the armor bearer's just, chopping them, hitting them with the rocks over their head. And they slaughtered 20 men. So now, it's like waking up an ant pile. The Philistines figure this out and see this, and they start trembling. They're starting to scatter everywhere. There's confusion. But they were so worried or so scared, there was trembling in the camp, in the field, and among the people. Even the garrison and the raiders trembled, and the earth quaked so that it became a great trembling. And the last time we saw a quake and some trembling was a few chapters ago, right? When Saul was anointed publicly. Was that when it was?
I think he did.
There was no wonder. Sorry, guys. Right. Okay. Samuel's talking to him. They've confirmed Saul. This is chapter 12, 18, verse 18. So Samuel called to the Lord. So Saul's been anointed publicly. Called to the Lord, and the Lord sent thunder and rain that day, and all the people greatly feared the Lord and Samuel. And I remember that Nancy said that was an unnatural time for thunder and, the rain. And so usually I have found that when there's something unnatural happening in the natural world, you bet your bottom dollar probably God's presence is around. So I'm thinking because Jonathan honored God by asking him, and God showed him the way, that God's presence was there and causing, this Philistine started moving around quickly and confusion and trembling, because I think they felt something bigger. There's just two guys that showed up and killed 20 men, but they're trembling. So I feel like they know something. They know something supernatural. Something has happened that's huge. Okay, so Saul, still sitting under the pomegranate tree, is just waiting. And I think he's waiting because he didn't wait last time, but now he's waiting too long this time. He just doesn't have good timing. And he's waiting when he's supposed to attack, and then he attacks when he should have waited. He just doesn't have a good instinct for timing. So he's not sure what's going to happen, and he realizes that Jonathan's not there. And he knows the Philistines something's happened. So he decides to bring in Ahijah again, or Ahijah, I don't know. And he says, bring the ark of God here. For the ark of God was at that time with the sons of Israel. And it happened while Saul talked to the priest that the commotion of the camp of the Philistines continued and increased. So Saul said to the priest, withdraw your hand. Now, I had to go back and read some different translations. But again, Saul's making sure that priest is there. I think that Saul, and I know later on he gets a medium, to a spiritual diviner. But I think Saul's superstitious. And I think he uses the priest and the Ark of God as a talisman, I guess, as a protection, as a we're going to win, a mascot, because he's nervous and he doesn't know what's happening, but he was using it for his purposes, for man's purpose. And I noticed whenever it says, because when the back in Samuel 4, when the Philistines take Samuel chapter 4, when the Philistines are taking the ark, I noticed that it was called the Ark of God when it was being used for man's purposes. When the Philistines had it, when the Hebrews had it, when they were using it as something that, like a mascot, something that's going to protect them, not because they were trusting God. All right, but when the Lord, they did it for the Lord, and it was the right thing to do. It was the Ark of the Lord, L-O-R, Yahweh. So here it says Ark of God. So that's kind of to me, that's a clue that this whole charade that Saul is going through with the priest, it's all for Saul's purpose. The ark's supposed to be where? In the tabernacle. Yeah. So Saul's just not doing so well. Now, there is a translation that this isn't the ark, it's the ephod. In some other translations, it's called the ephod. Well, the ephod is what the priest wore. So in another translation, it's saying, I think it was New King James Version, or not NIV, but and then the Message, it said the ephod, and it was capitalized. So I would think the high priest ephod. So Saul's panicking, and in the other translation, he's saying, "Bring the ephod, put it on," and then he's like, "No, that's not working. Take it off." But here's the ark. So withdraw your hand, put your hand on it. Now take it off. I don't know what was going on in Saul's mind, but it was not trusting God, and it was not seeking God's will or doing anything for God's glory. So then he decides to come on in, and the Philistines are running around, and apparently some Hebrews had been with them in their camps. So Saul goes into this confusion with some men, and the Hebrews start coming out of the caves. They are, who are in the camps with the Philistines, they're running around. I think they were saying some of them got killed by their own people. So the Philistines weren't sure who was who, and they were killing each other. I mean, it was a big kind of mess. But the Lord delivered Israel that day, and the battle spread beyond Bethaven. Now the men of Israel were hard pressed on that day, and they're gaining. I mean, Jonathan started this, but they're gaining momentum. People are coming. The Hebrews are coming. The forces are gathering. They see the Philistines are kind of at a weak point, and they have an advantage. Well, Saul said, he made a stupid oath, and he said, "Cursed be the man who eats anything until I have avenged myself of my enemies." I mean, it's just all about him.
Didn't even make sense.
No, it didn't. So all the people of the land entered the forest, and there was honey on the ground. So they're not supposed to eat anything, but here's all this honey. And, it's like manna from heaven. God provides, and sometimes we just ignore it, because we've either, we're not, it's like the joke. It's not really a joke, but the guy's on the rooftop, floods everywhere, And God sends a boat. And the guy says, no, God's going to rescue me. I don't need the boat. And then the helicopter comes, and he's like, no, I'm trusting in God. He's going to rescue me. So the helicopter leaves, and then the flood keeps rising. The waters keep rising. He drowns, and he gets up to God, and he says, I trusted you. Where were you? You said you would save me. I trusted that you would save me. He goes, I sent you a boat, and I sent you a helicopter. And that's how I feel like these people, like, duh. There's honey on the ground. I mean, God, and this is like this isn't a really fertile area. I mean, I would think that you're fighting, you're hungry, here's some honey. And he did say it was a land of honey, milk and honey. So here's the honey, and they're not using it because of their stupid leader. But Jonathan didn't hear about it. Right. So Jonathan didn't hear about this, and he saw some honey, and his eyes were brightened immediately. And so, when somebody's starving or they're worn out, they look dull, pasty, just worn out, tired, and all of a sudden his eyes were brightened, and he got better energy, and he just could keep on fighting. And the other people, the other Hebrews who were listening to Saul, were starting to lose speed, to lose steam. It was just hard for them. Then one of the people answered and said, your father strictly put the people under oath, saying, cursed be the man who eats food today. And the people were weary because they weren't eating. And Jonathan goes, my father has troubled the land. See now how my eyes have brightened because I tasted a little bit of this honey? How much more if only the people had eaten freely today of the spoil of their enemies, which they found. For now the slaughter among the Philistines has not been great. He's following God still. Jonathan is. He's not really. He's loyal to his dad, but he's disappointed with his dad. My father has troubled the land. So, I could see them having a power struggle here. Saul has already taken glory for the first garrison that Jonathan smote. I love that word, smote. And now he's made a decision that is hurting the people in a great moment where they could have done better or had more of a victory over the Philistines, even though they still did. But they were weary and they were tired. And I think Jonathan's just kind of frustrated with his dad. So then what happens? Because they turned down something that was provided by God because of their leader, what happens next? What do they do? They're starving. They didn't eat the honey. Yeah. It sounded like they just were so hungry and starving that they didn't eat, they didn't even cook it. I mean, it was just like savages just eating the raw meat. And one of the laws is can't eat blood. And that's huge because if y'all remember in Acts, the Council of Jerusalem for the Gentiles, that was still one of the requirements that they made. They didn't have to be, the Gentiles didn't have to be circumcised because now it's the circumcision of the heart. But they still were not allowed to take anything with blood in it. They had to drain the blood out of everything. They weren't allowed to take in somebody else's lifeblood. So,
I thought the comparison between honey and raw blood and meat. I mean, honey is one of the truest, a form of nature food.
right. Well, you're not killing anything to get it. You're not taking another life for yourself. You're not. It's provided by God. And remember, animals definitely weren't supposed to be eaten or killed until after Adam and Eve. I mean, before they were just, he was their caretaker, Adam was, and now they become a means of appeasing an angry God, basically. Anyway, so he says, don't eat the blood and don't eat the fat. And what were they doing? They're just. So then this is where I'm like, Saul goes, what are they doing? They're not this is the one rule he keeps. You know, he's like, stop eating the blood. You're not supposed to eat the blood. You know, I can do all the priestly things, but you're not supposed to eat the blood. And so he did honor God in some obedience, but his leadership, his ineptness, caused the people to sin. So, do you want a leader who encourages you to be walking in the path of the Lord, or do you want somebody who, you know, is getting in trouble himself and leading the people into it, like Trump and Hillary? Oh yeah, I gotta tell y'all something. Okay, so my 15-year-old has the phone, and he goes, I have 51 emails, and my 11-year-old now, his birthday was yesterday, 11-year-old goes, well, call Hillary, she'll erase them for you. And I'm going, oh my word. I didn't even know he knew. Y'all, I just realized I'm going slower than I meant to. I apologize. Anyway, so Saul confesses, you know, that yes, I did take the honey, and Jonathan confesses that yes, he did break the oath that Saul had made because he ate the honey. And what happens? And that kind of says something too about Jonathan, that he's apparently a good leader, and they like him because they're like.
Saul compared his oath with an oath of God.
Right.
That if you didn't obey it, it was sin against God.
Right. So, anyway, one thing though that's come out of all this is the Israelites are starting to see that they might have a chance. They've got Jonathan as a good leader as well. Anyway, so Saul really starts getting this army together, and the people come out of the woodwork, not scared as much anymore, and this army of the Israelites starts building. Saul started taking every mighty man and valiant man he could and attached them to his own staff. So now they're ready. In some ways, they've got 10,000 men. We're on chapter 15. 10,000 men of Judah and 200,000 foot soldiers. Okay, big increase from 600. So anyway, the Lord says through Samuel that he goes, I want to punish Amalek for what he did to Israel. And apparently there was something that had happened that Amalek had done, I think, as they were coming in to the land of Canaan. I wrote it down somewhere. I'm sorry, guys. But
Did he refuse to let the people go free?
yes, that was it. Yes, that was it. That was it. So he refused, and again the Amalekites. Thank you. They weren't part of the original 7 nations that were supposed to be destroyed, but they were another nation that was hanging around, and God wanted them utterly destroyed. And utterly destroyed, she had y'all mark, and that just that means everything: women, children, men, everything, because that's what God said, and that's what He wanted. And if a king doesn't obey the Lord, then the people aren't going to obey the Lord. So he says, I want everything put to death utterly. So he went in and they captured, they defeated them, but they did save the Kenites, who were a people, because they
told them earlier to move.
Right. it's kind of like Rahab, the prostitute that helped the spies out, and then she and her family were saved. In what, Jericho? I can't remember. Anyway, so the Kenites are saved, and so God does remember anybody who blesses His people, He will bless them. I mean, even if you don't believe in Him, if you've blessed His people, then He will bless y'all. I mean, bless them. So He captured the king of the Amalekites. Thank you, Mom. Alive, and all the people were put to the edge of the sword. But Saul spared the king, Agag, and the best of the sheep, the oxen, and the fatlings, the lambs, and all that was good, and were not willing to destroy them utterly, but everything despised and worthless that they thought were worthless, they were utterly destroyed. The word of the Lord came to Samuel. I regret that I have made Saul king, for he has turned back from following me and has not carried out my commands. And Samuel was distressed and cried out to the Lord all night. And Samuel rose early in the morning to meet Saul, and it was told Samuel, saying, Saul came to Carmel, and behold, he set up a monument for himself, then turned and proceeded on down to Gilgal. And Samuel came to Saul, and Saul said to him, Blessed are you of the Lord, I have carried out the command of the Lord. And Samuel again asked him a question. What then is the bleating of the sheep in my ears, and the lowing of the oxen which I hear? And Saul said, They, and now he's pointing to the people, they have brought them from the Amalekites. And the people spared the best of the sheep to sacrifice to the Lord your God. Not my God, your God, Samuel. But the rest we have utterly destroyed. So he's blaming others for the bad stuff. And he thought really Samuel would praise him. I did this for God. But it was not. So then Samuel said, Is it not true, though you were little in your own eyes, you were made the head of the tribes of Israel, and the Lord anointed you king over Israel, and the Lord sent you on a mission and said, Go and utterly destroy the sinners and fight against them until they are exterminated. Why then did you not obey the voice of the Lord, but rushed upon the spoil and did what was evil in the sight of the Lord? And then Saul said to Samuel, I did obey the voice of the Lord and went on the mission on which the Lord sent me, and I had brought back Agag the king of Amalek and have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. But the people took some of the spoil, sheep and oxen, the choicest of the things devoted to destruction, and to sacrifice to the Lord your God, again, at Gilgal. And Samuel said, Has the Lord as much delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. For rebellion is as the sin of divination, and insubordination is an iniquity and idolatry. Because you have rejected the word of the Lord, he has also rejected you from being king. And, throughout the Bible, the Lord doesn't really delight in our burnt offerings as sacrifices. And what does he want?
Obedience.
And us, our hearts, to love him with all our minds, all our hearts, with everything we have. And for rebellion is the sin of divination, and subordination is an iniquity, or is as iniquity and idolatry. Insubordination, not following the word of God. And, I have to say, God didn't want Saul, really, but people wanted him. And Samuel didn't want Saul either. But God has a long-suffering heart for us. And I think the main point for all of this is that he wants full obedience. And Saul was obedient occasionally when it suited him, or when he was scared or not sure what to do. But when he wanted the glory, he was very prideful and wasn't obedient. So I think some of the questions at the end were, does God want some obedience occasionally, or does he want full? He wants it all the time. And, you know, one of my favorite verses, I guess when I'm not being obedient, well, I know I'm not being obedient ever, but it's Psalm 51, and she didn't have you do this, but she had given you some other verses where he says, I don't desire burnt offerings and your sacrifices and your feast. I want you. I want your heart. I want you to glorify me because I made you. I'm your creator. But one of my favorite verses that I have to say over to myself again, because especially when I know I messed up, is Psalm 51. And this is, I think a lot of people know these verses, starting with 10. The first part of that psalm is confession of sin, but the supplication is towards the end, and it says, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. Do not cast me away from your presence, and do not take your Holy Spirit from me. Restore to me the joy of your salvation, and sustain me with a willing spirit. Then I will teach transgressors your way, and sinners will be converted to you. Deliver me from blood guiltiness, which is a covenant word, O God, the God of my salvation. Then my tongue will joyfully sing of your righteousness. O Lord, open my lips, that my mouth may declare your praise. For you do not delight in sacrifice, otherwise I would give it. You are not pleased with a burnt offering. The sacrifices of God are a broken spirit. A broken and contrite heart, O God, you will not despise. And, you know, I think if Saul truly had a circumcised heart for God, even when he was disobedient, but would confess and actually repent in his heart and ask God's forgiveness, he, you know, it could have been another story for him. And, you know, that's hard. It's hard to be obedient, and incomplete obedience is still disobedience. And I think we all struggle with that. Saul certainly did, with his pride, his self-reliance. And I know she had you look up to compare him with Uzziah, King Uzziah, in I think Chronicles. But King Uzziah kind of did the same thing. He was intended to be great. I mean, he was doing some great things for the kingdom. Building and expanding, bringing jobs in, helping the people. And he got a little prideful. And he went into the temple. Again, I don't know what it is about these people, but went into the temple and burned incense, which, you know, burning incense is to send up prayers to God. But the priest is supposed to do that. And again, he took over and did something like Saul. You know, God has a place for everybody. We all have a job. We have talents he has given us. We don't all have to be everything because, you know, the Hebrew people, God was supposed to be their leader. They didn't want that. They wanted a human, and but he could have used all their talents and just, that's why we're a church. Puts us all together to be one family, parts of a body. And I don't think Saul got that. He didn't use his resources well. He did everything himself the way he wanted it done, and everything's falling apart. And I just think our lives fall apart when we don't listen to him. So anyway, sorry, it was
Great.
Thank you.
anyway. Let me